Today's guest is an expert on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. If you don't know what an ADU is, don't worry, we're going to be talking about it today and how you can actually be implementing it in your own portfolio. And by the way, it's much cheaper than you might actually think to add one. Welcome back to another episode of How I Started. My name is Noah Bacon, and today I'm joined with Derek Sherrell. If you're looking to retire early, stick around and listen to Derek's story on how he got started, and I guarantee you're never going to look at a barn or a garage the same way as you did before. Derek, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing, my friend?
Better than I deserve, Noah. Thanks for having me.
Sounds like a Dave Ramsey intro, if I'm not mistaken.
That's funny. Yeah, that actually is from Dave Ramsey. I don't believe in everything he teaches, but that's where I originally heard that. So good call. You know, it's a financial guru when they can call out your quotes like that.
Absolutely. So the premise of the show, it's obviously in the title, How I Started. So Derek, I just want to, reel back the clock a little bit and ask you, what were you doing to get started into real estate? Who were you, if you could set the scene for us a little bit?
Yeah, for sure, Noah. So I got started in real estate like a lot of us out here, right, by accident. And it was through the path of labor. I started an apprenticeship when I was in high school, thanks to a really cool woodshop teacher that saw that I probably wasn't going to go to college and needed some skills. And so I got started into the carpentry apprenticeship and building at a really young age, and I just grabbed onto it. It was something that was fun for me. It was something that I could do and make a living at, and really just fell into the building industry, and that was kind of my foot in the door to later becoming an investor.
Awesome. So let's talk about you becoming an investor then. Can you tell me what you were looking for in your first deal? Was it a primary residence? Were you looking for something you could get your hands on with your experience as, obviously working as a contractor and in construction, or were you looking for something more traditional?
Yeah, great question, Noah. Really, it was, I'm a slow learner. So just for all our listeners out there, you don't have to pick this stuff up quick. I was really the lever. We talk about leveraging other people's time and other people's money in the investment world. For the first several years of my building career, I was the person being leveraged by the investor to do the work. And after 2 or 3 years of building these secondary units for other investors in my local market, I finally had that light bulb moment where I understood that I could potentially do this for myself. So again, coming to the party a little bit late, I was doing this process for other people. I realized I could do it for myself. And the only way to get started in our market, which is a probably 50% higher than national average entry point market, was to house hack. So that's my long answer to I had to house hack to buy a primary residence with traditional financing, 3.5% to 5% down, depending on the product at the time. And that's how I got started.
Awesome. Let's break down that first deal a little bit, if you don't mind. So, you're in that high net worth area. It sounds like the homes could have been, priced out for a lot of people if they weren't willing to make that sacrifice of house hacking. And, you're doing it before that term was even coined. So can you talk to me about what the numbers were on that deal, what you had saved up, and what your numbers kind of looked like to offset your mortgage a little bit to make that, dream more of a reality?
Yeah, for sure. I'll go right into it. So I moved into this house in 2001 on my 21st birthday. And after I rented the property for a year, the owner, who was a real estate agent, said, "Hey, I'm going to sell this house. Would you like to buy it?" And I said, "I don't think I can afford a house." This was back in the time of the stated mortgage income rules. This is really what led to the great financial crisis, was these loans that were pretty much fake. So when she told me, "Hey, I'm going to sell this house. Do you want to buy it?" My first thought was, there's no way I can afford it. She said, "Yes, you can. Let me get you set up with a lender." So I went into a mortgage lender. The purchase price of the house was $210,000. I was 21 and a half years old. I'm thinking there's no way I can afford this. And she qualified me on a stated income. And for anybody that didn't buy a house in the early 2000s, the stated income is where they put the numbers onto the application that you need to qualify, whether you could meet them or not. For example, I was making, maybe $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and I was making twice that. When the loan officer said, "How many assets do you have?" I said, "I don't have any assets." And they said, "Yes, you do. You've got tools, and you have gold, and you have fur," and all the stuff that wasn't true. And as hard as it is to say that, that was just the standard back then. So I qualified for this mortgage that I shouldn't have qualified for, 7.5% on a variable rate. Again, this is the kind of lending that led up to the great financial crisis and the loan debacle for subprime mortgages. And so I purchased this house. I remember leaving the closing table, and I had some money saved up for the down payment. I put 5% down, but I left the closing table, and I didn't have enough money in my account to even buy lunch. Like it absolutely drained me. And I had about 7 weeks until my first payment was due, and I had income coming in from my business as a carpenter. But those were the numbers. The average market price at the time was about $160,000. And because I couldn't qualify for the whole amount, we financed $190,000, and she carried back a second for $20,000 because I didn't have the down payment to match the full purchase price that we had agreed on. So I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that it was a subprime mortgage. I didn't know that I used creative financing with partial owner carry. I just took massive action and kind of fell into this first property.
That's amazing. It's you're the first one to really like break down, going through that process right before the great financial crisis. And I would even like your story sounds like it could be in the movie The Big Short to me, as I got my investing started obviously pretty far after the financial crisis. So I've only heard these stories, but to actually have you as living proof of a success story coming out of that is pretty unique, I would say. And can you talk to me about what you kind of did next then? Did you start getting more single family homes with those loan products? Did you get into more, as we see today, traditional financing, or were you still able to scale with what was going on during those times? If you don't mind talking to me about that a little bit.
No, it was just a slow, steady grind. So I was still a carpenter at this time. We were starting to see work slow down. We were starting to see, storm on the horizon in the building industry. It's always been feast or famine, and we could kind of see this bubble building in our local market. I didn't have any economic background at the time. I was financially illiterate at the time. I just remember thinking this isn't going to last. And so I ended up going back to school to become a fireman. I was building on the side, and I didn't have another property for several years. And 3 or 4 years later, I ended up buying another property, again, a house hack. And if anybody out there doesn't know, you need to watch more of Noah and what he talks about. But house hack is really where you buy some kind of primary residence, and something on, in, or around that residence produces some kind of income. I always used it as either renting rooms or building a secondary unit. But you could also, rent your garage. You could rent a field for somebody to grow grapes. You could rent space behind your house for somebody to park an RV. So don't think you have to build an ADU to be a house hacker. But my next property was, again, a house hack. The benefit is buying with low down payment. Instead of putting 20 or 25% down, you put anywhere from 0 to 5, depending on your position. So I just bought a house a few years later. And that was where I deployed my first ADU in the ADU strategy. And then even after that, and we can walk through the story, I did not scale. It was never on my radar to build a bunch of houses and leave my job and become financially free and then teach other people how to do it. It was just a real slow, steady path of action, normal W-2 job as a fireman. And then it wasn't until later in my career, maybe 5 or 6 years later, that I started to realize, hey, this is a repeatable blueprint, and if I just keep doing what I'm doing, it's only going to take X amount of units to basically have FU money, as our friend J.L. Collins would call it.
It's funny how, we said you and I both utilized that same strategy to, I'm years behind you where I'm still starting off my portfolio, but where, you've had this massive pivot and massive growth, as we know you as that ADU guy, and you've already hinted at, building that unit onto my next house hack. What can you talk to me about some of your strengths as an investor? Because you are obviously in a really unique space where I love watching you on Instagram, where you're the most funny, most relatable contractor that we possibly have on our reels here that we see consistently. But I'm sure it's not easy for you to just learn that overnight. You had that apprenticeship. So can you tell me about some of those things that, you really took these strengths from, the courses I did, my background before being a firefighter, and implemented it into your own portfolio? Yeah,
I would say to our listener out there, if you're looking to get started, and you're not going to love to hear this, and this is not going to be a good opening statement, but it's hard. And it takes a long time. If I could give you any piece of advice, it's just play the long game. And you bring up social media, which is a really, really amazing tool. But I can just say this, especially for our new listeners here, is don't judge your insides based on somebody else's outsides. Play the long game. So I started building skills in this industry when I was 15. I didn't buy my first house for another 5 or 6 years. I didn't buy my second house for a few more years after that. It takes a long time in the trenches of honing your skills, understanding credit. Credit scores are great, but even better than a credit score is keeping your debt to income ratio in line. You could have great credit and a great job, but if you have a brand new boat and a brand new truck in the driveway, you're not going to be able to house hack. So the skills that I was learning really were just were keep my head down and physically grind. And over about a 10-year period, I would say anybody today can be financially free in 10 years or less, period. And that sounds like a long time, but for people like you, Noah, that are just getting started, like you're literally 20% of the way there from when you bought your first house. Like it's not as long as it takes, but the thing I would say, the skill that I built most was the ability to make money, to have a long-term approach, and know that I was not going to get rich overnight. This is I call it clearly the get rich slow plan. And so many of us today, we see all the cool stuff that's going on, and we see the flash and we see the cash, and we think that like we're not doing it right, or we're too slow, or we're not in my market, or well, they had a tech job. I was a laborer. I was a blue collar worker, even as a fireman. I had a very modest salary. I just saved my money, worked hard, kept my head down, and played the long game. And you mentioned the social media piece, which I'm so thankful to be able to share the stuff I have today and the stuff that we do with other average people so they can do it too. But for the first 20 plus years, I didn't have an account. I didn't share one reel. I didn't share one video for the first 20 years of my career while I was learning this. And I think so many people today, they think they need to be a content creator and they need to post everything they're doing. And I went into it backwards. And it seemed to have been kind of a common theme. Some of the people that I look up to and that I really respect, they just worked harder than everybody else for like 10 years or more. And then they show up and they look like an overnight success. But really it was years in the trenches. So play the long game, have a slow, steady, repeatable path. And like anybody can be financially free in 10 years or less.
I could not agree more with everything that you just said, and I think what I really found attracting when we first met at that expo in person was, your ability to talk to different investors, but just be extremely relatable. Even though you're, like you said, 10, 15 years, 20 years down the line further than me, you still know how to talk to the average person. You're still going through the grind as the average person, and it's extremely admirable to latch on to a story like that where it's just the absolute truth, where you've grinded for those 10 years. So, in that long-term tenure to get to financial freedom, and I say long-term because everybody, like you've already hinted at, wants to kind of get rich quick in this space. What's been some of your biggest struggles that you've had? Have you had a deal that's gone sour? Have you had a project that you just, I knew this was going to be really bad, and I still went into it 2 feet in. Can you talk to me about anything like that that's just been just negative for you during your experience as an investor?
Yeah, I would say the same point that I just made about it takes a long time is the biggest negative. I mean, if I'm honest with everybody right now, like I'm super impatient. I want it now. And it's hard. I can have a long-term approach, and I have played the long game, but it is a slow, steady pace. And there's been many times where I just, wanted to give up before the miracle because it's hard and it does take time. So impatience, I would say, is probably the largest struggle I have. I never really had the intention of scaling early. I never used other people's money. I've still never borrowed a cent from anybody to this day. I just keep recycling my own capital. And I wasn't ever in a hurry. And I want everybody to hear this. Like, you don't need 100 doors. You don't need 6 doors. Door count does not matter. Like, how much money do you need at home right now, for our listeners, that would bring you joy? It's probably less than you think. So I was just like doing one at a time. I would fund my own deals. I would have a high cash flow because I left a lot of cash in the deal. I wasn't looking to leverage up. But with all that being said, I've always wanted to like speed up the process. So it's kind of a catch-22. Like, it takes a long time, play the long game, but it's okay to be impatient and be like, I don't have 10 years. Like, I hate my boss. I want to leave my job next week. I don't have this. I don't have 10 years. But just remember that, you can't have one without the other. You can't have the light and the freedom without kind of the darkness and the hustle. But impatience, the timeline of building wealth slowly is a negative. it's going to take some time.
Yeah, and I think like you kind of said, like there's people that are frustrated with their jobs, and if you look at it, I'm never going to advise anybody to jump 2 feet into real estate and quit their job by any means. But if you can, stomach with going 30 plus years in your career at a W-2, what's stopping you from, putting that drive into real estate as well to really minimize your time for financial freedom. And that's what I want to ask you now here. What is your exit strategy when it comes to real estate? Are you going to eventually sell off all the beautiful ADUs that you've built and, sit happily on a beach one day? Or are you going to, start to reel back just a little bit when it comes to your schedule being really crazy, I know, with all the work that you do? Or are you still going to keep your foot on the throttle and keep it going here?
Great question, Noah. You should be a podcast host, by the way. I'll tell you that I just love what I do. It brings me joy. Like when I wake up in the morning and I think about the day ahead of me, like I'm pumped up. And as long as I feel that way, I'm going to keep going. And I don't have some crazy, amazing story that's powering me. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When I first started building multiple ADUs at once and starting to kind of scale up my operation, I would get a lot of flack from neighbors. A lot of people don't like people building around them. There's this NIMBY movement. And as an infill housing developer, I would get, it was never personal, but people didn't like me building around them. And I would always just use that spite for oppression of housing as my jet fuel. And that was really what powered me. And, I literally have built units out of spite before. And nowadays I've kind of transitioned back into just doing it for pure joy. So as long as it brings me joy, I'm going to do it. My overall master plan is to build as much housing as I possibly can until I die. And then when I die, I'm going to give it all to the people. And I'm not giving it to my kids. I'm not giving it to some estate. It's going to go back to the working class through a foundation that I'm going to set up. I've got a couple organizations that are not for profit in mind. Potentially like Habitat for Humanities would get some of the portfolio, potentially the Housing Authority, potentially maybe the city or the local university. So the plan is to teach people in my network and my kids how to build wealth, not give it to them, and then to give all this away. And real quickly on my backstory, I grew up, in a struggling family with a single parent and moved around from apartment to apartment. And housing is really, really near and dear to my heart. So as long as I feel joy to build more housing and know that I'm going to give it all away, there's no end in sight. I'm going to keep going. I want to influence 1 million ADUs in my lifetime through my reach and through teaching and through giving away our plans and giving away our educational stuff that teach people how to build these. And that's a big feat. I'm going to have to live a long time and work really hard to meet that.
It's amazing. It's, you have your why clearly defined, and, you're a living, breathing example of what a lot of investors should be doing and aspiring to be, following your footsteps here if they do have that want to really get the hammer to the nail a lot more. And, I think you bring a really, really unique perspective to it all. And a question that I ask everybody on the show is, what's one piece of advice that, I wish I had before I got started out, or I wish somebody told me that. Can you tell me what advice you'd give somebody today that is, looking to move from that first rental into their first primary home, or get started in real estate?
Yeah, it's hard to say one. This is a gentleman took me to lunch when I was 16 years old, and he was a local developer, bigwig guy, lots of experience, lots of money. And so I'm not going to say that I made this up. I got it from him. But he said, Derek, as a blue collar worker, you can look wealthy or you can be wealthy. It's hard to do both for the first 20 years. And he said, as a contractor, never drive a brand new truck. When you show up on a job site, and this can apply to anybody in any field, but he said when you show up to a job site, you don't want people thinking that they're paying for your vehicle. You want them to think that they're paying for your knowledge. And that really stuck with me. So to boil that down into some deliverables for our listeners, I mean, you don't have to take any notes, but just hear that if you can buy assets and not liabilities, so, you got to live a modest life, and, don't buy flashy stuff. Car payments are a huge killer. It's the number 2 expense besides housing, transportation. It's like passing food. Everybody thinks they need to keep up with the Joneses. I could go pay cash for any vehicle I want, and I still drive an old minivan, like with a missing hubcap. It's a 1999 Ford Windstar is like my daily driver. That's my best car. I'll have investor friends come into town and we'll go do ADU tours. And they're like, I thought you were joking. Like, that really is your car. So I still practice the principles that I preach. You can look wealthy or be wealthy. It's hard to do both for the first few decades. And don't waste your money on new vehicles because you think you need it to get from point A to point B. Like that's the number one DTI killer people have. Like your banker does not ask you how much money you spend on food when you go qualify for a primary mortgage to house hack and go from tenant to owner. Okay. They do look at that car payment. So drive old vehicles, live below your means, and play the long game. One day you'll pick your head up and you'll be like, holy shit. Like, where did all this come from? How did I get so lucky?
Once this airs, I'm sure our CEO, Scott Trench, is going to be giving you a comment and a thumbs up on this one, because my first day at the office, I thought the same thing when I met him. I was like, does the CEO of our company actually drive a 2001 Toyota Camry?
Corolla.
I'm probably butchering, Corolla. I knew I'm butchering the year and the make and model, of course, but it was right there, parked right in front of our office when we got there, and that was my, like you just said, oh my gosh moment. Like, if he's doing this, practicing what he preaches, this is a key recipe to financial freedom. And it's not any BS. It's exactly what you guys do day in and day out. It's the vehicle that you've used to lower your expenses, and then house hacking to eliminate two of the biggest expenses that you have. So Derek, I really can't thank you enough for your time today. And it's been awesome to really pick your brain on how you got started, because I know a lot of our listeners are, wondering how to get over that big barrier to entry. And, like me, I'm really attracted to your path and how you've gotten to where you are today. So thank you so much again for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm an open book. Reach out. If I can help anybody out there, you can shoot me a DM on IG. I respond to all those same day. Don't be afraid to reach out if you need a hand or have any questions. All I ask is if you reach out to me, be ready to take action.
Awesome, my friend. And if you're all looking to learn much more about Derek, we'll have all his information in the show notes below. And you can actually see him speak this year down in Mexico at BPCon in Cancun. It'll be from October 6th through 8th. And if you're looking to find out more, you can go to biggerpockets.com/events. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can head over to biggerpockets.com, search my name, Noah Bacon, and I'd be happy to connect with you as well. Please like and subscribe to the Bigger Pockets rookie channel here, and we cannot thank you enough. We'll be sharing many more stories just like Derek's on how we got started. So join us next time and have a great day.